Hey everyone, welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm Brian Doyle here with you today. And today we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, being a VCIO and certainly engaging with our customers as well. But you're not going to hear it from my perspective, which I'm sure many of you will be happy to hear. I've got a guest that's joining me today. He's been doing some work with us over at VCIO Toolbox, but he's got his own organization that we'll be talking about today to really help empower the MSP community to be better, to engage better, and retain longer. So if I can now, I'd like to welcome to the podcast George Mellor of VCIO Growth. How you doing today, George?
Doing great, Brian. How you doing?
Doing awesome, man. Doing awesome. So George and I just, for ha-has for everybody there, we just did one of these just yesterday. So this is going to feel very similar to he and I, but very new to you. And definitely take the words that he shares as wisdom, because he's amazing and what he's doing out there with the community. But George, for those that don't know you, maybe you can kick off and tell a little bit about, your journey, how you found your way into the MSP space.
Yeah, basically, I came out of a large technology vendor that was fairly big, had fairly big name during the 80s. And I exited Digital Equipment Corporation many moons ago, but that's basically what launched me at the time into the VAR space. And like many, we evolved from VAR to IT solution provider to MSP. It was a great journey, had a lot of fun, worked with a bunch of good people. Worked with some marquee accounts and, really came up through the ranks, started as a technician, engineer, project manager, and eventually, made the mistake of saying, yeah, sure, I'll manage people. And, sounds like
managing people, always fun.
So that kind of put me into the management ranks and eventually into leadership roles, into several MSPs over the years. And, of the last, I'll say, decade or so, I moved from the MSP space into really helping build tools and frameworks for MSPs, really to either help them deal with specific issues or generate revenue that they were otherwise missing.
Yeah. And I don't want to overlook the story that you said to start this, which is, you came out of Digital Equipment. For those of us that are in the Northeast, DEC probably spawned half the IT solution providers that really kicked off in the 90s and the early 2000s when that came out to be. I think anybody that's grown up here in the Northeast that has a technology background has some lineage that harkens back to the DEC days. And what was the ruination for DEC, George? Was it somebody not thinking that PCs were ever going to take off?
Yeah. I happened to be in the room at what was called DEC World at the time, where Ken Olsen, the founder of Digital, proclaimed that basically PCs were Tinker Toys and would never take off and wouldn't have any impact on the business. Well, it turned Digital Equipment upside down over the course of several years.
Yeah, nobody will ever want to have one of those in their house. So, guys, we always hear about Microsoft and the West Coast being a real catalyst, but if you pretty much go visit any technology company on the 128 strip, they probably have DEC in the background. But that's our history moment for the day, George. Now we're going to move forward. So, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing today with your new organization, VCIOgrowth.com, or VCIO Growth, but I put the URL in the window for those of you that are listening.
Yeah, but VCIO Growth basically spawned out of my last company, which was called Cloud Readiness. And Cloud Readiness basically focused a great deal on helping MSPs alter their business model, alter their selling motion into the cloud, and really prepare to do subscription and more reoccurring revenue on a regular basis. During the last several months, when I knew the company I was going to exit, because I had agreed to sell it, I spent a lot of time working with the MSPs who said, hey, we're following your VCIO guidance, but we're getting nowhere. There's really been no growth. The clients are happy, but we're not really seeing the amount of opportunities we need. So I took 10 of them basically and said, hey, let me jump on some of these calls with you. I'll just sit in the background, just as a participant, and then we'll take a look at what I see. And basically, meeting after meeting after meeting was Groundhog Day. It was all about how many tickets we were closing. Here's what needs to be refreshed. and basically, how great the MSP was doing. And I wasn't hearing anything about the client's business, right? Yeah. So, we'd go back, sort of like here, we went back into the green room and said, hey, let me tell you what I saw. I saw a client who basically wanted to get out of the meeting. I basically heard an advertisement for your business, and I didn't hear much about the client's business. And this was a reoccurring theme over several of these MSPs. So it basically just started working with them saying, hey, this would be kind of cool if we talk about their business, maybe find out what their business objectives are, and really dig into how close are we with mapping, your initiatives, the stuff you've been recommending, to what their objectives are. And in many cases, they're way off.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many of these QBR events, don't start with, it's all about the customer, right? It's about their needs, thinking of it from a lens of the person across the desk, and how much of it's just, the show up and throw up, here's a lot of great data points to try to validate what you're billing them, I guess, right? That's kind of a big part of it. The other thing I've seen, George, was it went from more of a, there's kind of been a cycle, and it looks like it's coming back. It started out, as more of an informational journey in the early days. Those of us that were doing QBRs, go back even before 2020 type time frame. It was a lot more about, hey, it was about your business. And then somewhere along the way, people figured out, oh, wait, we generate revenue when we do this. And certainly that was always an intention. But I think it shifted from being kind of a leadership role into an account manager role. And when it went to the account managers, who of course also had quotas and their compensation tied to account growth, these things really became thinly veiled sales calls and focused more on refreshes and low traction, obviously things that needed to be done, but low traction, low, acceleration for the business type projects. What are some of your thoughts about that, and what you can do to avoid that trap?
Yeah, and I was seeing the same thing, and literally it became almost, one of those situations where people put themselves in a box. they knew the routine, they felt comfortable in the QBR. However, the QBRs weren't looking very effective to me. So literally, most of what I've been doing prior to exiting Cloud Readiness and then starting VCIO Growth was to say, hey, let's coach you through this. Let's go through, what a really good QBR would look like, where the client's excited. The client is now seeing you getting in tune and in alignment with their business, and the dialogue becomes something that's not forced, right? So to your point, when you're talking about the client's business and you're giving them recommendations that will fix problems, it's not selling, right? You're just guiding them to the right place. So a lot of what I'll talk to about the people I work with is, becoming the trail guide, really laying down the path for them. All the things you would talk about, in the sense of, let's show you what the next 12 to 24 to 36 months look like, and why these initiatives are important, and really why the client at the end of the day hopefully feels that they are the ones who suggested these, because they laid out the business and agreed with what you were bringing to the table for them.
Yeah. And, I think that's such a key component. There's so many people that say, yeah, we're bringing a strategic plan to the customer, and that strategic plan is simply the roadmap, right? And while the roadmap can be a strategic item, it's only a strategic item if the VCIO has put some thought into it. How am I sequencing these projects? Is it matching the way they spend? Are we even going to be able to deliver from our side? I see, common, mistakes being made where they front load all the projects across all customers, and there's no way they could deliver them if they all say yes, right? But more important than all that, from my perspective, is great, you're telling them about the project, but are you guiding them to what the benefit and the outcome is going to be? Because that's where the decision's made, not just on price, not just on the when, not just on the fact that, hey, I trust you guys, but it's more, what's in it for me, right? So, I'm seeing a lot of that, conversations starting to evolve finally around the roadmap, where people are like, a roadmap alone is not strategic without some guidance, without some, context to it. It's just really a bunch of numbers that I'm asking you to give me.
Yeah. And one of the biggest things in that, and you brought it up, is really, what's the client's criteria to success, right? We all know how we manage our projects and what we consider a great outcome, right? But one of the first things I try and work with the folks I'm working with is, ask the client, how are you going to measure this? How will you know this was successful, right? And so we can look at mileposts along the journey and know that we're on track. We're delivering what the client wants, and ultimately they're getting what they wanted to begin with. Right. So many times when we structure, a lot of the initiatives over the years, we have great project plans. We've got all these milestones. We know what the costs are. We know what the time allocated is, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, nobody asks, like, what will you see as the success of this project? How are you measuring us? Right. So that's something that I've been working quite a bit with the folks I'm working with, to just basically say, and we just call it the criteria for success. But what does the client consider successful when we get to the end of project A?
Yeah. And I think, another thing you got to think about is beyond just like the business review, right? A lot of folks equate VCIO and QBR as if they're one and the other. But I know you've kind of broken it down into two phases. There's kind of the traditional, QBR process, but then you're really coaching to a lot of fractional VCIO work as well. Maybe you can expand a little bit more on what you see as the fractional VCIO's role going beyond just the business review.
Yeah. So from my standpoint, fractional, VCIO is just a great way somebody can consume something, right? They can buy expertise on demand at a cost perhaps they can't, get if they hire somebody internally. A. B, they can do it, very quickly where, as trying to hire a good candidate these days, can be 90 days if you're lucky. So it's something you can turn on very quickly. But the most important thing, I think, is you can bring expertise you may not have immediately to bear on a given set of clients, right? And really use a lot in the way of what I call executive conversations to sort of change the viewpoint in the client's mind as to what you're doing for the client, how you're doing it, and the questions you're now asking of the client in the dialogue you're having with them. So you put yourself into a totally different place, especially if the client has looked at you as nothing but the technology provider who, again, is providing a very valuable service that is ultra important, but they've perhaps never had a business conversation with any of you folks, right?
Yeah. And let's expand on that, right? I mean, that's probably the biggest trap MSPs fall into, is by not having the strategic conversation, that's where you get into the commodity trap. That's where it becomes, well, these guys fix things. And while valuable, it's also shoppable, right? And couldn't be something that we go out and find the lowest bidder for. And it's getting a little bit, we've always found getting a little bit deeper, getting more strategic is what changes the narrative of how the customer perceives you as well. So what are some of the steps you're taking to kind of train people that way, George?
So it's really twofold. Like you said, Brian, the fractional services we provide, we get in there, we work with the client. Obviously, they're a critical element of the overall delivery into the client, but they, in some cases, some of the biggest impact we have is they get to learn by watching us, right? Yep, and seeing how we deliver things and see how we don't get skittish about having a business conversation where they might. So we've had a lot of success in literally just showing them, what the template looks like, and then doing, after what we call after mission reviews, basically, just basically going through and saying, here's what occurred, here's where we think we made an impact. Here's where we were seeing the client is having issues with what was recommended. Here's how we're going to lay out the next steps. And as probably one of the biggest benefits we've shown is we do VCIO services all day long, and look at the amount of preparation we do to get ready for these meetings, right? What are we focused on, right? And we show them how we prepare for these meetings, which has had a huge impact, because many times what we were finding is folks were walking into these meetings unprepared. Once they got by ticket counts and maybe a project or two that they were talking about, they didn't have a lot to say. So, we basically go through the regimen of preparing them for the meeting, and then we coach them up. And in many cases, we're looking to turn over the role to one of their people and have them be the lead. So we have this model that we do, which is in the first several meetings, George will be driving the car. Once we maybe get to meeting 5, Bobby's going to drive the car, right? Your person, right? And George is going to be there just to back them up and really just coach them through getting used to that. And then, when somebody, maybe doesn't have somebody ready for the role, we have other clientele who have really good people. They're just looking to switch how they do QBRs and become more business centric. in those meetings, and we have a training regimen and framework that we take them through, when they have the right people who just need help getting to a different place.
Right. Awesome. So, George, we've covered off a little bit on kind of the value proposition. We've covered off a little bit on, what people can do to, better engage, what they can do to better position themselves. Obviously you're engaging your customers. What are some of the things that they can do with you? How can they engage with you to get better at being a VCIO? Certainly you're taking it a step further than any of us vendors will probably be taking it with our clients. So tell us a little bit more about, some of the programs that you've got.
Yeah. So the true primary vehicles are the fractional T1 VCIO services that will, allow them to engage with us and literally get to immediate benefit, because we're stepping in, we're taking the lead, we're working with their team. And ultimately what we're looking to do is get into those meetings and really get, I'll say, to a point where we enrich the client relationship, because we're starting to alter it, number one. But as importantly, we're looking and have gotten to a very successful point. Within a couple of meetings, we're really pulling out a lot of opportunities the MSP never found, right? And because we're just having, I'll say, better conversations with the client. So that's one of the biggest things. So, for folks looking at the VCIO program they have as a growth engine, we can play an integral role. We really focus a great deal, and I know you're a big proponent of this, that we're in there, we're finding the right opportunities, we're basically getting to short closure on them, because again, the client is really in a position where they've agreed with you. This is a big, a big initiative we have. We understand that it's tied to objective A and B, right? We understand we have to do it, right? And we understand we need to do it in this timeline if we, the business owner, are going to take advantage of the opportunity we have in front of us. So we're really doing a lot of that. And then for those folks who really are comfortable with their VCIOs and the program and framework they have in place, we really just coach them through and bring them through a training program, which takes them through what we call the executive conversation. How you set up talking about their business, talking about the financial side, talking about ROI, talking about how do you basically link and align your initiatives and recommendations to their business objectives and goals, right? Which obviously your platform does a great job of doing, right? And really lays it out in a way that they can consume it easily. But we really take it just a few steps further, which is, this is how you get those things on the table. This is how you bring the client through the buying process, quite frankly. And this is how you get to close.
Yeah, we always say as a platform, we're there to help reduce the amount of time it takes to prep, organize your thoughts, and get it out there. But if you don't have a process, if you don't have a mission in mind to go deliver, it doesn't matter what tool you're using. It's just going to be a bunch of numbers, right? And I think a lot of folks can benefit from saying, hey, is our program being effective? And if it's not, really looking to folks like yourself, George, who are out there trying to coach, try to bring some advice, and really going to be working with them more on the process side of things and really develop that piece. There's so much value that can be gained out of the QBR, but what we usually see is the biggest dangers, or out of the whole VCIO process, but the biggest dangers are not going in with a plan, driving a commodity story, really just dropping the ball and not being accountable. And I know that's what a lot of coaches are doing too, is making sure that they stay on track. George does some training with us as well. And I think you've seen some folks can go into the abyss sometimes if they don't have guidance, and more importantly, executive leadership driving it from the business side too.
Yeah, I mean, probably the single biggest thing we found, and this was transitioning from my old business into this new business, was the fact that many people were just walking into these meetings and, quite frankly, trying to wing it, because again, they know their business so well, they're so comfortable with the technology, but after the first 10 minutes, there wasn't much substantive dialogue. And literally, it was, how do we fill the next 10 or 15 minutes, right? Yep. Without an agenda and without, actions and outcomes that the MSP was looking to accomplish in service of the client.
Yep. So, it's always been about having a plan, thinking about the person sitting across the desk and their needs and trying to respond in kind to those folks. And while that sounds so simple, we see time and time again, MSPs will revert back to, but what's in it for me, part of the story, or, or if they're feeling pressure that they're getting put into the commodity bucket, it's how can I demonstrate value and make sure people understand what they're paying for. And, a lot of times people aren't worried about the hours, they're worried about the outcomes. And we always got to keep that in mind too. It's value for your dollar doesn't mean that you're putting in 50 hours to earn your $5,000 or whatever the numbers might be. It's how are you taking that $5,000 and making it more efficient, more productive?
Yeah.
Making sure that we're protected, making sure that we're innovating where we need to. AI is such a big story, and a big part of our lives as well. How do we get that integrated into it? I know you were sharing some of your AI thoughts. Maybe you can share a little bit where the VCIO can take that conversation as well.
Yeah, and I believe that the VCIO has a critical play in this space because you can look at it very simply. Most MSPs in general don't know what to do with AI. Neither do their clients, right? To me, that is just the wide open Wild West, which is fantastic, right? Because this should be a gold rush, right? So what I coach, my clientele on, and I every MSP I can talk to about it, which is if you haven't had a conversation with a client on AI, have one tomorrow, right? It's a great reason to pick up the phone and get in front of them and just say, hey, client A, what do you think of AI? Are you looking to do anything with it? What are your thoughts, right? And get the dialogue going, because what you'll find, and this is something we've seen time and time again, is most of the clients are already using AI. It's just not in a structured fashion, right? So immediately off the gate, you can immediately jump into a security and compliance conversation, right? Not be an AI expert, just know that the client, if you haven't approved tools, you ought to look at, let's work with you and get some tools that are approved. What data and information could be put into an AI engine, right? How are you securing it? What's floating around? And what information's already been let into an AI, generative AI platform that you didn't want there, right?
Yep.
And get that dialogue on the table. Not once are you talking AI technology or creating a chatbot or doing anything of the nature. You're basically just talking about you, whether you know it or not, have something that's growing within your organization. You, the owner of the business, of the leader, needs to get it under control. Let us help you, right? Let us find out what the folks in your organization are doing with AI, and then let us help you structure. And I'm a big proponent of frameworks. Create a framework where we can guide you to the right place within AI, because you harness it, you prevent security and data leakage, right? And you get it under control. But the next thing you're doing literally is getting the client's attention and basically getting them to a place where, you become the leader, and an AI consultant or another MSP can't come in through a side door and basically push you out of the AI conversation, right? So, that I'm a big believer that, even if you're afraid or don't know what to do with AI, start the conversation. You're already the trusted advisor. Use that to your favor, right? And just talk to the client. What are you doing with it?
Yep. And for those of you that are listening that are VCIOs, George hit on something really important at the kind of the beginning of that snippet right there. What is being placed in the wild is a big concern around AI right now. As VCIOs, if you're not at least having a conversation of not so much what to do with AI, but more, do you know what your employees are doing with AI that you might not be aware of? It's, similar to the shadow IT story, but probably a little bit scarier, because really end users are using ChatGPT all day long to do amazing things, but they're also feeding that beast with information. And are they feeding that beast with any customer information, any of your intellectual property, anything that shouldn't be going out there? So at a bare minimum, and forget about what tool to use or this, VCIOs can really guide their teams to going, hey, are you doing an inspection of what your team's doing with AI? Have you asked them what tools are you using and how are you engaging it? Have you brought them education, simple education, saying, hey, by the way, as soon as you put in ChatGPT, it's now public. Are you aware of what you're putting into those tools? And here's a policy we want you to follow. So the customer, or so the company has some teeth to be able to terminate or do things that they might need to do if something's breached.
Yeah.
There was an article recently, and I'm going to not go into details because I don't remember them all, but it was simply a small company did just that. They were working for a larger company, took a lot of that company information because they wanted to crunch the numbers and get a spreadsheet spit out. Next thing you know, that the information is now part of ChatGPT and the OpenAI system. And it's really scary because I don't think anybody's doing it intentionally. But it can happen if there's not somebody telling them, hey, by the way, that's public. Hey, by the way, whatever you put in there can be utilized again. Hey, by the way, are you even paying attention to what you're putting in there? Because we know it makes things faster.
Yep. Yeah. And exactly. And you hit the nail on the head, because it's really all about governance, securing your information, and really ultimately becoming the training guide, if you will, to your client. And again, whether you create your own training or you partner with somebody else, the course I would take and the course I'm taking with my clients is, let's get in there with AI, talk about cybersecurity and governance. Let's talk about training up their employees. And then let's talk third about tool selection and what meets the needs of the client, as the third or fourth element.
Yep, no doubt. Well, George, we've definitely hit the end of our time. Do you have any closing thoughts you want to share before we wrap up for today?
Probably just one. So if you're out there and you're an MSP and you've got a VCIO program and you're thinking about it, really take a look and say, what do we want out of the program? Is it yielding the results we want? And if you step back and say, no, it's not really yielding what we'd like, give us a call here at VCIO Growth. We can probably help you.
All right. And to that end, for anybody that wants to connect with George, I'm now putting up his LinkedIn as well. Again, you can reach VCIO Growth at VCIOgrowth.com. We'll have these links in our show notes as well. But George, I really want to thank you for joining me again today, and certainly for everything that you're doing to try to educate the community on being a better VCIO as well.
Thanks, Brian. You appreciate it.
All right. And listeners, you can get this podcast on YouTube and anywhere that you can download it on the web from your favorite podcast vehicle. We'll see you again next week. And thanks for joining us.